The night everything almost ended, I remember thinking that the world had made a terrible mistake by continuing to move. Cars still passed by, people still talked on their phones, and somewhere in the distance a child laughed, as if nothing inside those hospital walls mattered at all. Meanwhile, the man who had become the center of my entire life was lying in a sterile room, fighting a battle his own body had started. I sat on a cold bench outside the entrance, staring at the glass doors, wondering how something so fragile as hope could feel so heavy in my chest. My name is Claire Donovan, and that night was the first time I truly understood how close love and loss can stand to each other. Before all of this, my life had followed a quiet and predictable rhythm. I had plans, routines, and a future that felt solid enough to lean on. I met Daniel Hayes during my final year of nursing school, at a time when everything in my life was about to change anyway. He was not loud or flashy, but there was something steady about him that made people feel safe without even realizing why. He worked long days in a small woodworking shop, shaping raw pieces of wood into something meaningful, and he carried that same patience into every part of his life. Being around him felt like stepping into a calm space where nothing could rush or break. We built a life together slowly, without trying to force anything into place. Our home was not perfect, but it was ours, filled with unfinished projects, warm dinners, and quiet conversations that stretched late into the night. Daniel had this way of smiling even when he was exhausted, as if he refused to let the world take something simple and good away from him. When we got married, I truly believed we had all the time we needed. There was no urgency, no fear, only the quiet confidence that life would continue unfolding the way it always had. The first signs that something was wrong were so small that I almost ignored them. Daniel would come home later than usual, saying he had stayed extra hours at the shop. He looked tired, but that was nothing new. Then I noticed the bruises, dark patches on his arms that he could not explain. He laughed them off at first, blaming clumsiness or long days. But I could see something in his eyes that he was not saying out loud. As the weeks passed, his energy faded in a way that felt unnatural. Simple tasks left him breathless, and there were nights when he would sit on the edge of the bed, struggling to steady his breathing while pretending everything was fine. I pushed him to see a doctor, and that decision marked the beginning of a reality I was not prepared to face. The tests, the waiting, the silence between answers. All of it felt like being suspended in a space where time no longer moved normally. I remember sitting beside him when the doctor finally spoke the words that changed everything. His bone marrow was failing, his body was no longer producing what it needed to survive, and without a transplant. The outcome was something no one wanted to say directly. I held his hand tightly, nodding as if I understood, even though my mind was struggling to process what I was hearing. From that moment on, the hospital became our entire world. The life we had built outside those walls seemed to fade into something distant and unreachable. Days were measured by test results, medication schedules, and the constant hum of machines that never seemed to rest. I tried to be strong for Daniel because that was what he needed. But there were moments when the weight of it all became too much. I would step into empty hallways or locked bathrooms just to let myself fall apart for a few minutes before returning to his side with a steady face. What made it harder was the way Daniel handled everything. Even as his strength slipped away, he kept trying to comfort me. He would make small jokes, telling me I worried too much. And there were times when I almost believed him, but I could see the truth in the way his hands trembled and the way his voice softened when he thought I was not paying attention. Time was moving faster than either of us wanted to admit, and the search for a donor was not bringing the answers we needed. He had no known family who could be tested, no one who shared enough of his biology to offer a match. The fear of losing him became a constant presence, something that followed me even when I closed my eyes. Every morning I woke up with the same question sitting heavy in my chest, wondering if that day would bring us closer to a solution or closer to the end. The doctors did what they could, but there was only so much medicine could do without the right donor. Hope started to feel like something fragile, something that could break if I held it too tightly. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted in a way I could not have predicted. I was walking down a quiet corridor when I overheard two hospital staff members talking. They were not speaking to me, and I do not think they realized I was listening, but something they said caught my attention immediately. They mentioned a man in a small rural town who looked almost identical to Daniel. The name of the place, Cedar Ridge, stayed with me long after the conversation ended. It felt like a strange coincidence at first, but something deep inside me refused to let it go. That night, I could not sleep. My mind kept circling back to the same thought, replaying those words over and over again. It did not make sense, and yet it felt important in a way I could not explain, by the time morning came. I had made a decision that felt both desperate and necessary. I was going to find that town and see for myself if there was any truth behind what I had heard. It was not a logical plan, but logic had not given me any answers so far. The drive to Cedar Ridge felt unreal, as if I had stepped outside my own life and into someone else's story. The city faded behind me, replaced by wide open fields and long stretches of empty road. Every mile I traveled felt like a step further away from the world I understood. I kept glancing at the photo of Daniel on my phone, reminding myself why I was doing this, why I could not turn back even if the entire idea seemed impossible. When I finally reached the town, it felt small and quiet, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and nothing changes quickly. I stopped at a local store and showed the clerk the photo. The reaction I received was immediate and unmistakable. He recognized the face right away, pointing me toward a man named Lucas Reed who lived just outside the main area. My heart started racing in a way that made it hard to think clearly. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something that resembled real possibility. The house was simple, worn by time, but still standing with a kind of quiet resilience. I sat in my car for a moment, trying to steady my breathing before walking up to the door. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if I was approaching a moment that would change everything one way or another. When the door finally opened, I felt the world tilt beneath me. The man standing there looked so much like Daniel that it was almost impossible to process. The same eyes, the same shape of his face, even the same quiet presence that seemed to fill the space around him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I simply held out the photo, watching as his expression shifted from confusion to something deeper, something that carried years of unanswered questions. He told me his name was Lucas, and as we began to talk, a truth started to unfold that neither of us had expected. Daniel had been left behind as an infant, separated from his biological family under circumstances that had never been fully explained. Lucas had grown up knowing he had a brother somewhere, but he had no way of finding him. There had been no connection, no shared history, only a quiet absence that lingered in the background of his life. Hearing that Daniel was not only real but in danger changed everything for him in an instant. When I explained the situation, telling him that Daniel needed a bone marrow transplant and that time was running out, he did not hesitate. There was no fear in his response, no doubt or second guessing. He agreed to come with me, to be tested, to do whatever was necessary. It felt as if this moment had been waiting for both of us, as if the threads of two separate lives had finally crossed at the exact point they were meant to. The return to the hospital felt completely different from the way I had left. I was still afraid, but now there was something else beneath that fear, something stronger and more stable. The tests were done quickly, and when the results came back, they brought the first real sense of relief I had felt in months. Lucas was a strong match, not just a possibility but a real chance. The transplant process was not easy, and there were moments when the uncertainty returned in full force. But this time, it was not the only thing I felt. There was hope again, fragile but growing stronger with each passing day. Daniel endured everything with the same quiet strength he had always shown, and Lucas stayed close, watching over him with a kind of devotion that spoke louder than words. When Daniel finally learned the truth, when he understood that he had a brother who had come back into his life at the exact moment he needed him most, the emotional weight of it all broke through his usual calm. I saw him cry in a way I had never seen before, holding onto Lucas as if he was afraid of losing him again. It was not just about survival anymore. It was about connection, about finding something that had been missing without even knowing it. Recovery was slow, but it was real. Day by day, Daniel began to regain his strength. The color returned to his face, his voice grew steadier, and the light in his eyes slowly came back. The hospital, which had once felt like a place of waiting and fear, began to feel like a place of healing and second chances. And through it all, Lucas remained by our side, becoming a part of our lives in a way that felt completely natural. When we finally returned home, everything felt different, not just because Daniel was alive, but because our world had expanded in a way we had never imagined. The house that had once been filled with silence and uncertainty now carried a sense of warmth and connection that had not been there before. Daniel returned to his work, taking it slowly but with the same passion he had always had, while Lucas became a constant presence, someone who belonged without needing to be asked. One evening, as I watched the two of them sitting together on the porch, talking and laughing about things they had never had the chance to share before, I felt a quiet realization settle over me. Life does not always follow the path we expect, and sometimes it breaks in ways that seem impossible to repair. But in those broken places, something unexpected can grow, something stronger and more meaningful than what was there before. I used to believe that family was something you were given at the beginning of your life, something fixed and unchanging. But now I understand that it is something more than that. It is something that can be found, built, and even rediscovered when you least expect it. And sometimes, it is the people who refuse to walk away, even when everything is falling apart, who define what family truly means.